April 14th at 6:20 p.m. We have as our first order of business before the public forum, a discussion regarding a request for transfer from the reserve fund of $8,500 to be able to staff up and train for Pleasant Pond this year. And I will defer the discussion of this to Kevin and Jackie. So Captain, Assistant Chief Kevin DiNapoli?
Yes, how you doing?
Hi, Captain. How are you this evening?
I'm doing well, doing well.
Okay. So we have the request for a transfer. I thought maybe we could hear from you and then from either Jackie or Tom as well. So if you would like to introduce this subject and how we want to move this forward, please.
I am in the car, just in the interest of full disclosure, so I don't have complete immediate access to my notes because I'm coming back from a assessment today.
Okay.
But I can certainly give my input on it. I know, according to Chief Perkins and through Officer Sanborn, who's one of our officers that's taken a lot of involvement with it, we are in good shape relative to staffing. It appears the initial requests from the usual kids that help out all seem pretty good. So I think as far as that part of it, we should be good. We shouldn't have to do any major hiring. So that's important.
Mhm.
I know what had come up, and it was touched on a little bit last night, was our biggest concern was not treating it so the gatekeepers or the lifeguards have to act as babysitters, if you will. And we were hoping to make sure that no one under 12 would be dropped off with anyone who was under 18, I believe was the age we picked.
Right.
Other than that, no other real changes.
Right.
Unless Jackie recalls that I'm missing something.
My understanding is the $8,500 request is $7,000 for salaries and $1,500 for expenses that were not budgeted within the FY21 fiscal year. It's opening, lifeguard certification, prisoner meals for spring cleanup. We have folks from the House of Correction help us out with that. Is that what that's about?
Yeah, we normally do. I'd have to reconfirm that relative to any COVID issues that would allow that. So I can certainly check into that to ensure that that's still able to take place as it usually does.
Okay. And then there's a porta potty, a rentals expense, and some staff uniforms, which looks to be pretty modest. That's for t-shirts. That's
correct.
Okay. So Tom, Jackie, Jamie, so this is for funding before the end of this fiscal year that we didn't have the monies available through June 30 to open the pond adequately for the training and staffing. We have dollars, I believe it's $20,000 in the budget starting July 1.
Yep, so we're fully funded in 22 for the end of this summer and for the start of next season.
Right.
You know, the funky thing about the pond is that it spans 2 fiscal years.
Yeah.
But this was one of the COVID-19 related cuts we made last year as part of trying to get, to the number that we were seeking for the override. And we also, from an operational standpoint, had to deal with the restrictions, and the beach ones were quite strict. And so for a beach of this size, there was not very much we could do in the way of opening the beach last year. So we had closed the parking and not done any sticker sales.
And just the other caveat to this that we've discussed is that Hamilton this year will not, as far as we know, I don't think formally been voted on, is that correct? But will not be participating in the funding of Pleasant Pond this year.
Correct, because we didn't run for fiscal 21. We didn't receive any revenue from them this year. And now that we have a quorum on the select board again, I anticipate at some point they'll be submitting that formally to our select board from theirs.
Okay. But that doesn't impact right now on this particular immediate request.
Not at this time. The only, and Jamie can correct me if I'm wrong, the only reserve fund transfer we've actually done to date this year is for the TA screening committee for the recruitment firm.
Mhm.
So, it is a tight part of the year where we are still waiting. May 1 is the next tax bill deadline. So it makes sense to do it from a reserve fund transfer. Jamie can speak to the cash flow impact though. This isn't huge dollars.
Yeah, I think at this point, this is the time of the year where we are tight. April is a rough month, and we're in that last quarter phase where our bills go out. The bills went out, but they're not due till May 1st. So I think the more appropriate thing would be to do the reserve fund transfer. We're doing good collection wise and tax wise, but as you know, the first of the month we get hit with the school bill and that goes out and that's almost $1 million monthly.
Okay. Any of the finance committee members have discussion or questions around this request for transfer of funds?
I do not.
I don't either.
Okay. Any other discussion from Jamie, Tom, or Jackie? Okay. To move this along, I'd make a motion that the Finance Committee accepts the request, approves the request for transfer from the reserve account, an amount of $8,500 to provide for the opening and staffing of the Pleasant Palm Beach within this current fiscal year ending June 30.
I'll second it.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any other questions or discussions from the FinCom? All those in favor?
Aye, Carrie Jelsma.
Hi, David.
Hi, Susan.
Hi, Jim. Okay. That carries, and we can move forward to opening the Pleasant Pond this year.
Jim, just a legal
Catherine.
note.
Catherine, excuse me.
Oh, sorry, Jim, just a legal note. If you can stop by at some point and sign that RFT when you have a moment.
What do you want me? What do you want me to do, Jackie?
If you could stop by to sign that approved RFT. Just a reminder that we need your signature on it.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Thank you.
I'll make a note right now.
Just wanted to remember while we were on the subject, sorry.
That's all right. Okay. Okay, now we're going to open the meeting to the public forum to discuss and review the fiscal year 22 budget. Let me just make some general comments if I could. The way this will unfold is we will do a high-level budget overview. We'll review the primary revenue and expense drivers. We'll do a high-level discussion of school enrollment trends and the assessment for the town of Wenham. We'll review the primary financial warrant articles that are before us. That will also be discussed, by the way, on the April 26th warrant hearing. And then open it up to comments and questions from the citizens. If the citizens listening in would accept this, we'd like to hold questions to the end of the presentation. So that's how we're going to kind of move forward here. It's a relatively brief presentation, and I think a positive presentation in the sense that that this fiscal year, for FY22, I should say, is we are looking to budget the operations, the capital requests within our existing resources of the 2.5 levy limit, new growth and the use of free cash. There is no article or request for an override for the fiscal 22 budget. So having said all that, let me start out first. I don't believe there's a specific slide, but some of the considerations for FY22 with the pandemic. So we had a few things that are challenging to us this year, although they're looking, I think, a little bit better in most recent discussions. And that is local receipts. Excuse me, well, I got this. The local receipts, state aid, and the iron rail. Let me just start with the local receipts. The local receipts are made up of a range of issues, including excise tax, other forms of revenue that come into the community. Those have been a little bit difficult to kind of forecast, but I think we have forecasted fairly conservatively. The iron rail, like all businesses within the Commonwealth, have had some challenges in meeting their business expenses. We are working closely with them. Mr. Younger and Jackie Bresnahan have been working with the Iron Rail Commission to review with them both their challenges and meeting their obligations. The state aid for FY22, we have budgeted fairly conservatively, and we believe that in recent discussions, Tom Younger and I just had a discussion today, it appears that the state aid that we budgeted conservatively will be available to us in fiscal year 2022. So while we've had our challenges, we've also had some positives, by the way, that I think are just noted, should be noted. And that is, and we began to track this over a year ago when the pandemic opened up in terms of real estate tax collections, real estate tax revenue. And we found at the time in the first 5 months or 6 months, for example, from about March to March, April, May, June, July of last year, that our tax receipts mirrored pretty much the tax receipts of the prior year. And that continues to date, that our tax receipts are on target of what we've collected in the past. For Wenham, it's an interesting issue, because we on one level we suffer, if you will, from not having commercial revenue coming in through commercial real estate taxes, but at the same time we have a very stable base in our residential tax revenue base, and that hasn't changed dramatically at all. So we're fortunate in that respect. So we're going into FY22 feeling relatively okay in the face of the pandemic, and we think that what we've budgeted is fair and reasonable and somewhat on the conservative side. So that's what I do want to say in regards to the in regards to that. Okay, Jackie, can we go to the first slide? Jackie? Hello?
Jim, do you want to move past the agenda?
I did.
Oh, sorry.
I think I did. We'll get to it. So let's go to the revenue. So what this chart basically shows is a total net revenue of just over $22 million. I think of note here is that I think there's another slide of this, Jackie. Could you go up one more slide, the same one, but another note on it? I might be mistaken, but slide 4.
Sorry, Jim, I'm clicking. I'm just a little bit lagging. I apologize.
There you go. Okay. So what I wanted to note on this slide, other than a few other details, is 97% of the town of Wenham's revenue comes from two principal sources, and that's the real estate tax of almost $19 million, 86%, and our local receipts. So we are, as everyone I think is aware, we're highly dependent on the local receipts and our real estate tax revenues. This year, we are using, our total free cash this year is 826,000. 316 of that, of which is going to be used as revenue to, and we'll discuss this in another slide, it's going to be used as revenue to assist with the town operations. So that free cash number 316 is a portion of our total free cash revenues, which we'll discuss in a moment. So that's thrown in here to demonstrate the free cash that is revenue that meets our expenses. The net state aid is about 270,000, 268, which is just a 1%. This year, for the first time in 4 years, the assessors and the Board of Assessors approved an amount of $125,000 to assist with town operations. Over the course of the past, I believe, 4 years, the town has the assessor's office, and Steve, our head assessor, is here with us this evening. He can expand on this. We have accumulated, I forget the total number of dollars, but adequate enough in reserve of that overlay account to transfer 125,000 into the operations account, which is allowable under our bylaws and actually the Department of Revenue. Steve, would you like to comment on that?
We have been pleasantly surprised by the lack of abatement applications, which is what the primary function of the overlay is for. So we've not had very many. And as of right now, we have none pending before the Appellate Tax Board, to my knowledge, unless someone has just filed this year. They have 90 days after they get their answer for this year. But for any prior years, we do not have any. The state changed the rules a couple of years ago. You used to have to keep a certain amount for each fiscal year that has gone by. That is now one fund, which, you know, is the type of thing that, somebody should have done a long time ago. It's just one fund. So we have a sufficient surfeit, shall we say, to give the 125. No problem.
Good. Thank you, Stephen. We appreciate working with the Board of Assessors on moving that forward. That was helpful.
Our
So
pleasure.
basically, that is our revenue source. It stays constant, not the actual numbers, but the source of revenues and the percentage of revenues for the town of Wenham has stayed essentially constant over the years. There's obviously new growth, and the 2.5 levy limit increases our amount of allowable revenue from real estate. But this chart kind of demonstrates where we get our resources from to make things work in the town of Wenham. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Free cash. So as I mentioned a moment ago, the Department of Revenue, through the Division of Local Services, certifies every city and town their so-called free cash at the end of the year, so that those dollars are available. into the upcoming fiscal year for a range of expenditures. So this year, out of the 826 by our own bylaws and the Department of Revenue best practices, we have set aside $250,000 as a reserve. This is a constant dollar amount that we have reserved in the past years. Then we looked at the free cash to say, well, how can these dollars assist the town of Wenham going into 22? And we divided it into two portions. We used $316,400 to assist us with town operations. That $316,000 essentially helps us avoid an override. That goes into the town operations account, which is allowable in the use of free cash. And that becomes a part of our resources to fund town operations, which we'll get to in a moment in terms of how we spend our money. We've also this year set aside about just shy of $260,000, which we will also get to when we talk about the financial articles, for one-time capital expenditures. That helps us remain up to date on our equipment and needs. And I will say it at this point, and I'll say it at another point, that this $259,000 does incorporate a long-standing challenge for the community in funding a master plan of $125,000. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a moment. So just go back to that slide just for a moment. So as you can see from the chart, the certified free cash has decreased from a high of almost 1.37 million dollars in 2016 to the current $826,000. So we are relying less on free cash, which I think by and large is a good practice in terms of funding town operations. And free cash for the FY22 going into 23 is yet to be determined, so we don't have that number yet. Okay. By the way, FinCom, if you have any comments or additions here, please feel free to jump in. So this is how we spend our money. As you can see from the color slide, I think that's pretty clear, actually. Thanks, Jackie, for making these slides nice and clear. Our biggest portion of the budget, as it has been now for years, is funding our regional share of the budget of the Hamilton-Wenham Regional School District. Let me just make a note about that. Excuse me. This is just my notes here. So the $12,036,000 represents 55% of our town budget. However, it also represents 35.6% of the total operating budget of the town of the school district. The total school budget is $38,738,000. And we'll get to this in a minute, but the assessed value is less than that because the 38,000 is offset by Chapter 70 aid, state transportation aid, so-called circuit breaker funding to fund special ed, choice tuition payments and special ed grants. So the assessed amount of 33, which we'll talk about, million, is we are 12 million of that is what I want to share. But that's a little bit long explanation, but the education piece is always a big piece. Then this year, as we will talk about, we have worked closely with the school department. The other two major expense drivers for the town, which is fairly consistent, is public safety. And public safety is made up of three different expense areas, three different expense departments, as the police, the fire, and the tree warden. Those expenses have a share 11% and expanded by approximately 2.5%. Public works, typically a major driver, but not unexpected. At 1.6 million, approximately 8% of the budget. Human services is made up of the health department, the council on aging, and the veterans department. A small slice, but an important slice of 1% of about 184,000. Culture and recreation. That is approximately 1.1 million, 5% of the budget. And culture and recreation is made up of the library, the joint recreation department, which we share with the town of Hamilton, and the historic commission. Just a note on the library budget. The library budget came in at literally the same budget amount from the prior year, predicated on a new contract agreement, which will roll forward going forward. But for fiscal year 22, it essentially came in with salary and wages at a level amount. We have to pay to borrow money, and that debt service is $525,000. General government, let me just quickly list what constitutes general government. It's the town administrator office, it's the board of selectmen, it's the reserve fund, it's the assessor's office, it's the finance department, it's information and technology, other town hall staff, the town clerk, and the land use and building grounds and permitting office. So those are some of the nuts and bolts staffing that really help us make the town operations run. And it's a relatively modest 7%, 1.5 million of the budget. The water fund is self-funded through the water rates and the water bills that we all pay as Wenham residents. It's $543,000 or 2%. Now the other there at 1.9, it's a major kind of a piece of the pie as well, but that goes into, which increases over the course of every year, general insurance that we have to carry for the community, the employee benefits, which includes health insurance for all the employees, Medicare, the community pays into a Medicare account, group insurance for coverage for the employees, and OPEB or other post-employment benefits. OPEB is a major piece of our funding challenge. That pays for health insurance for retired employees. So that other, while it's a significant amount and an important amount to support the town employees. Any other comments on the how we spend our money in the town of Wenham? No? Okay.
Hi, Angus West here. First time I've ever sat in on one of these, so I'm sorry I missed the first slide or two. As a concerned citizen.
Mr. West,
Hi.
if I could, I requested if we could to hold the meeting, the questions to the end of the meeting?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were asking for questions. I apologize.
No, I was asked, that's quite all right. I was asking the finance committee members if they had anything else to add to my remarks. So if you could write your question down, we'll be first to attend to it at the end of the presentation. Thank you. Student enrollment. One of the, we'll go at this kind of in pieces here. One of the changes this year in our school budget was while you'll see the finals, the top slide there, 2020. Let's see. 635. We had a decrease of enrollment, a significant decrease in enrollment, which also shifted costs more to Hamilton this year than to Wenham. But you can see for Wenham share, starting 4 years ago, 633, 624, 635, and this year 558, which, okay. So that shift in enrollment has had an impact, if you will, a positive impact on our school budget expenses, which I'll talk about in a moment. Okay. 3-year rolling average. Is Alex on by chance? All right. All right, I was going to have Alex speak to this.
Jim,
I'm having a hard time reading the numbers here. Well, I think the important graph, let's just look at the bar chart. You can see we're green, and you can see the reduction in our students this year. Hamilton is the blue. I'm looking at the fiscal year. I can't read it. Fiscal
Jim,
year.
I can read it.
here you can see it.
Can
yeah.
you read that, Carrie? I can't read the.
I can't read it on the screen, but I can read it on my printout.
No, I couldn't read it on my print either. Why don't you talk about that, Carrie?
Okay, well, one, I just want to back up real quick. When you showed the prior slide with a reduction in enrollment, and I know, Jim, you're going to talk about how that impacts our budget, but one way it impacts the school district's budget is it reduces potentially the amount of state funding called Chapter 70 funding we get from the state of Massachusetts, because it's based on total enrollment. And with COVID-19, some students from the Hamilton-Wenham Regional School District shifted to private schools. So that could impact, and now many of them are coming back. So where this number is 1630 in this 2020-2021 school year, we expect it to rise. And I just wanted to acknowledge that Gary Cheeseman, the chair of the Wenham Board of Select, has worked with Representative Brad Hill and Senator Bruce Tarr to request that our funding be based on whatever the highest number is going to be with the most recent enrollment numbers, not on the prior years. Just FYI, I just want to let you know that Gary has done a nice job of working with the State House to try to compensate for the enrollment shift and changes that happen for COVID-19. They're going to shift back and make sure that the state funding represents that. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. And then on the next slide, this is the Hamilton-Wenham enrollment with 3-year rolling average. And this is related to the way that Hamilton and Wenham calculate the different assessments of how much Hamilton is going to pay for the school district versus how much Wenham is going to pay for the school district budget. And we take a 3-year rolling average. So you take a 3-year snapshot and you calculate the average over those 3 years to get the next year's assessment. And for a while, well, the red line, I think, shows the total assessment. well, actually, I need to go back to my paper because I can't read the screen either. And you can just see that from FY21 to FY22, the green lines are Wenham, and it went from 635 students in Wenham down to 558 students. And so as our numbers have been going down, you can see the green lines, how they were higher and they went lower, and they're kind of flattening out. And if in prior budget years, we were getting hit significantly with increased enrollment, and this 3-year rolling average was impacting what our assessment was. And so that was contributing to some of our needs for overrides. And as you can see, as the green lines flatten out some, and then the relative proportion. Oh, thank you, Jackie. The red line is our contribution to the budget over time. As you can see, the green lines relative to the blue lines, our proportionate share compared to Hamilton is shifting, whereas we have less of the burden percentage-wise. And so, anyway, I don't know if that made sense or not, but it is shifting in our favor budget-wise, but it is also reflecting this total reduction in enrollment, which has some other impacts that I mentioned earlier.
It's
Anything to add to that, or if anyone has any?
Carrie, I'm just confirming. I think the red line is Wenham's percentage rolling 3-year average. If I multi-screen myself, right? So the 35.6 to 36.1, right? That's the percentage
Yes. Yep.
of Wenham's. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Carrie.
Sure.
Appreciate that. I think the next slide is another school slide. It is. So I touched on this earlier. So our assessment this year is 11.865, 11,865,000. Hamilton is 21,502,000. Just a note, Wenham's share of the budget this year went up 1.86%, for a total of relatively only $213,000. So that I want to acknowledge that reduction in the increase and a percentage of 1.8% in operations assessed to the town of Wenham has been of significant assistance as we went into this fiscal year. The shift in the budget and the enrollment is a little bit more than 1%, which makes a positive difference in the costs to Wenham going into the next fiscal year. As I mentioned, on this particular chart, the total assessed values to both towns is 33,367,000, and Hamilton is 21, as I said, 21,502. So that tells a little different story this year, which favors the financial position for the town of Wenham. Anything else on that chart, David, Susan, or Carrie, that needs further explanation? Okay, next slide. I mentioned this earlier, free cash. So Article 1, oh no, I'm sorry, financial articles. Article 1 is essentially the primary article of the 22 million that we'll be voting on to fund the town operations, including the assessment for the schools. That's all included in that 22 million number that we displayed earlier. And again, once again, we use a portion of the free cash, 316,000, to help us with the overall operations, which helps us, not helps us, it avoided using those free cash resources avoids the use of or going to a override. That's Article 2. Article 3, we use for free cash of, let's see, what's the number of that? What's the number of free cash for that? 269, is it? Did I have that right, Jackie?
259,600, Jim.
Right. So that number of free cash is a one-time use. It's to help us with the capital request and an approved capital request that the finance has approved. We have a routine every 3-year replacement of a cruiser. Cruisers have a life essentially of approximately 3 years before we have to trade them in. They reach almost 100,000 miles after 3 years. We've had a 2-year program of replacement rifles. This year, the second year of that, we cut that request in half. The third piece there, the library roof supplemental allocation of 75,000 is to repair and replace part of the library roof as well as the recreation department roof. This is a second funding of the roof repair request. Last fall, we approved approximately 75,000, of which we had an expense of approximately 30,000 of that, and Hamilton had an expense of approximately 65,000 as we share that cost for the library and a 66-34 essentially split. So this is to continue the upgrades of that roof, including now the rec department, which was not part of the estimate that was made a year ago. We are funding a compensation and classification study to determine both fair and equitable wages for existing employees, to be competitive with our neighboring towns, and to be able to maintain our employees and recruit new employees. So this is helpful, as well as when we go into upcoming union negotiations. We want to have the best data we can to enter into those discussions and to be fair and reasonable with our town employees. And finally, the master plan, which I mentioned earlier, is funded at $125,000. The $125,000 was arrived at by looking at a range of master plan studies throughout the North Shore, size of community. And it seemed that this $125,000 was a fair and reasonable amount to go out to a bid for organizations and companies that do master planning for cities and towns. It should be noted that we have not had an updated master plan since the early 1960s. There have been studies over the course of the past 15 to 20 years that will be incorporated into the master plan and will help with that initiative. So that's how Article 3 will unfold and help us in our capital fund requests. Okay, any other comments or questions from the Finance Committee on that? Okay. Annual consent. Consent decrees, let's see. Consent articles, so-called. We have these every year. They are essentially transfer of funds. For relatively modest amounts. The cemetery and trust fund, cemetery and other trust funds. There is typically not a dollar amount. It's a request for a identified amount to be transferred from the cemetery and other trust funds received in FY20 to be accepted by the town meeting. The Article 5 is a cemetery maintenance fund transfer of $6,000, a routine request to transfer $6,000 from the sale of cemetery lots to be used by the highway department to provide maintenance of the of the cemeteries. Article 6 is transfer from the water operating budget to water capital of $35,000, I believe, of $35,000. This is to put into a reserve fund to assure we have dollars to upgrade the water lines, of which I think we have over 28 miles of water mains throughout the community, which are 40 plus years old. So every year we request a transfer to be put into a capital account to make sure we have resources for that. And then Article 8 is a transfer from the water surplus to meet our obligation of retiring water department employee as he leaves our service. So those are the so-called consent calendar, consent articles, which are typically, not typically, always voted on at town meeting and are fairly relatively straightforward. Okay. Tax rate. So this is an estimate going into FY22 of an increase from $19.68 to $20.49, based upon the information that we have to date. Steve or Jackie, do you want to fill in the details on this particular slide? Is Steve still with us?
Yes, I am,
Oh, okay.
and I'm awake.
Thank you, Steve.
I'd like to say I've learned more about town government than I've ever wanted to know in the past half hour.
Well, I hope it's been interesting.
It has been, and I also want to say I'd love to see that 60s master plan.
Yeah.
There might be a chuckle or two there.
Yeah.
What you get for transparency in government, excitement.
We're a dull group, I'll tell you. Go ahead, Steve.
The first thing I'd like to point out is that last year at this time, the projected tax rate was similar, if not higher. I don't recall off the top of my head, but what this projected tax rate does not take into effect, into consideration, is that calendar 2020, which is what the next year's tax assessments are going to be based on, was a heck of a year for real estate. You know, in Wenham as much as anywhere else. So that let's just say that, let's pretend that the town was spending the same amount of money on expenses for 22 as they did for 21. If the assessments went up 5%, then the tax rate would go down 5% and everyone would have the same tax bill. So this tax rate that's projected does not take into account the anticipated increase in the tax base, both the increase due to market factors as well as the increase due to the new growth that the town has seen. The $1 million homes at Pine Hill, the $1 million condos $1 million homes at Spring Hill and the $1 million condos at Pine Hill. That's not really factored in here. That tax rate says, okay, we're gonna keep the same tax base, which we will not. So I am, I'm not gonna go out on a limb. I don't want to be tarred and feathered or hung in effigy, but I am confident that the tax rate will not increase to 2049. What else can I tell you? Any questions?
Well, and we'd be foolish to try to put a number in there at this point because we'll be held to it. But thank you very much, Steve, for that explanation. And when will we have a sense of what that tax rate would look like in terms of
Late fall.
Excuse me?
Late fall.
Late fall, no, October, November.
Yes.
Okay. And that will show up on the first quarter tax bill?
No. The first and second quarter tax bills are based on the prior.
On the prior year.
So those are
Going forward in
estimated bills.
January?
The bill that is sent out right around Christmas.
Yeah.
That's the bill that will be the actual, they're referred to as the actual bills. And one of the things that frequently happens is that people don't understand that they have underpaid their first 2 quarters taxes based on the prior year's estimates. So therefore, in addition to the higher tax rate, if that happens, there's also the makeup of what they've underpaid in the first 2 quarters. So it's a ongoing discussion that I have with these kind citizens of Wenham.
Right. Well, it's a challenge sometimes to follow.
Yeah.
And as you well know,
there's not a day that goes by that I don't stop and whoa.
Yeah, exactly. And taxes are of concern to the citizens of Wenham.
They are, absolutely.
If we get close to let's say we get close to the $20 number, we don't have that far to go to get to the $25 number, which has come to our attention over on a number of occasions.
Right. I don't see that happening unless there's a significant increase in expenses or a serious decline in the residential market.
Right. Not right away. I mean, down the road sometime.
Exactly. Well, what people don't realize, you guys maybe do, but the tax bills, the actual tax bills that went out for this third and fourth quarter, they're based on a valuation of your property as of 1/1/20, which is based on sales from 2019. So assessors are always chasing the market.
Yeah.
And it goes both ways. I've been a real estate appraiser for 33 years, and I've been through these cycles before. When you're down low, you never see a recovery. When you're up high, you never see a fall. There are people who are selling 3-deckers in Lynn for almost $1 million.
Right.
10 years ago, they could be had, 15 years ago, they could be had for 250 if they had plumbing. So it's an amazing thing, real estate.
So this discussion is to be continued.
Okay.
So thank you very much, Steve. We appreciate you joining us this evening. That's been very helpful.
Truly, it's my pleasure. And again, I've said it before, being on the finance committee, I've got to say, it's as difficult a job in town government as there is. My hats are off to you guys. Thank you. And I don't even live in Wenham.
Well, we have a great team, by the way. We have a good group that works hard together as a team committee.
Well, thank you. Thank you for doing so.
Okay, thanks, Steve.
I'll hang out for 5 minutes in case someone has a question. And
let's
also,
go to-
if somebody at the end of the meeting has a question, Jackie
Okay.
has my cell. She can text me. I'll be happy to log back in.
Okay, thanks, Steve.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay, slide 14, I think, is important dates. Is that right? Okay, so we have coming up with the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee a review of the total warrant, which includes the finance articles as well as other articles to be reviewed and voted on at town meeting on April 26th is the warrant hearing for all of that. Annual town meeting is Saturday, May 1st at 1 o'clock. It will be our third tent revival meeting. And then the annual town election will be the Thursday following the Saturday town meeting, May 6th at Wenham Town Hall from 7 to 8, 7 in the morning to 8 in the evening. I believe that we finish up our slides. Let's go back to Mr., I believe it was Osgood, is that correct?
West, I think. West.
Angus West, I'm sorry, Mr. West. You had the first question, so
Oh,
please.
thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't realize, I missed the first 3 minutes trying to figure out how to get my Zoom connection. But first, I want to thank you for putting this on Zoom. And second, thank your public service for what is a thankless job, as someone already just mentioned. And third, know that this is a very difficult job that you're doing. One of the reasons I signed in for the first time tonight is you had the misfortune of having me just cut the check for my real estate tax bill just yesterday, which really brought home some concerns that I know the town has talked about, but we don't, without the Chronicle, it's really hard to know what the hell's going on in the town anymore. So I'm going to ask a few questions and you can give someone else a chance in between. I missed the very beginning. The $22 million fiscal 22 budget is what percentage increase over fiscal 21? The total budget increase versus 21.
I don't have the 21 number in front of me. Do you have it in front of you, Mr. West, obviously?
No, I don't. No, I don't.
No,
I was trying to find I had looked for that stuff.
I believe it's 2.54%, but maybe Jackie or Jamie could let me know if I'm correct with that.
Is that right? Because why I'm starting with the starting point is I look at the tax bill, which is, that 2.05% of assessed value went up 5%. And I guess the assessed value didn't go up for most people in town. So that would make sense that it's really just the rate that went up since we haven't increased the total tax base of the town. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so that's not so bad. That helps me to understand one really basic thing.
Jim, do you want that exact number?
Sure, if it's just ballpark.
So for this upcoming July 1, so the increase from this current fiscal 2021 that started July 1 and ends this coming June 30th to next year, starting July 1, is a 2.41% increase over this current year of roughly $500,000.
Gotcha. So it really ties into that rate change that our assessed values haven't caught up. Okay, number 2, liabilities. A friend of mine told me that government accounting for pension liabilities is in the dark ages compared to public company accounting. You alluded to this when you mentioned that the general employment benefit 9% other included our post-employment black hole.
Right.
A friend of mine warned me this is not unique to Wenham, but it is a really big issue. What is our unfunded liability using typical actuarial assumptions? Because I know as I'm an investment guy, many investment people have assumed 7.5% rosy returns for pension funds and don't put as much money aside because they have this great view of what they're going to earn in the future, where most sober people are saying you're not going to get that anymore. So, because this has a huge bearing on where we are in our current funding.
You're right. And the school department is also struggling with this number. I do not have at my fingertips, Angus, an exact number of what our unfunded liability is. Jamie or Jackie, or Tom, do we have that number handy?
I'm pulling it up just as an informational piece while I'm looking for that specific number, because it's not one I had ready. So only $70,000 of those employee benefits that Jim spoke to are our contribution to OPEB. A few years ago, the town created a financial policy where every year we increase our payment of OPEB by $10,000. So this year, our contribution for fiscal 22 is $70,000. Those other employee benefits, things like our contribution to the Essex County Retirement, our current employee health insurance contribution, our general insurance, are not the same as the other post-employment, just as a point of clarification.
Thank you. So the total liability, if I were looking at this town's fiscal health, I'd like to know, not on a 1-year basis, but looking over 5 and 10 years and 15 years, do we have the resources to pay what we already have incurred with all our past employees or those who are currently working? So I don't ask for right this moment, but if you could be prepared to answer that question when we do have the town together, I think it's one of the 2 biggest questions. And the other big question I have, is someone who's lived here in the town my entire life, is how do we end up with a school budget of $39 million to educate 1,600 people, 1,600 kids? I did some quick math on a spreadsheet, and even if we take into account the state bringing that down to 33 million from 39 million, and we assume that we're back up to last year's number of Wenham kids at 635 instead of 558, we're spending $19,000 a kid before allocating these unfunded liabilities that we owe for all the teachers.
Right.
And if it's actually at the 558, we're spending $21,500 per student. And that's not the real number. So I was going to ask another question just to have handy at the town meeting, and I'm giving these to you well in advance. You know, where do we stand on our liabilities? Where do we stand on our competitive expense on our educating our kids relative to other towns, which leads to the final question, which is the part that's rubbing everyone the wrong way, is that 2.05% of assessed value that we pay in property taxes every year must be, I remember it was in the top 12 out of 365 towns in Massachusetts as an assessed rate. Where are we today? I'm glad to hear it only went up 4.5, but compared to other towns, which probably all relates back to this massive regional school budget and our unfunded liabilities and benefit plans that are layered on top of what we pay. What's our relative position? How well have we been managing ourselves compared to the other 365 towns? Does anyone have any studies? And when we do a master plan, boy, I would hope we know. So I'm sorry, those are all long-winded. Those are 3 really key questions I hope that we can answer for the townspeople.
Thank you very much, Angus. They're reasonable and pointed questions. The OPEB question has come up over and over again for both the town and the schools. The per pupil cost that you have mentioned, I will defer that to at town meeting to the school superintendent and the deputy superintendent for business, Angus, so they can reference that. We can certainly do some research of where we stand with our unfunded position. I think that's
Jim, I do have that figure if you wanted me to bring it up.
Okay, sure.
So this is based, I don't have the 20 audit with me. Unfortunately, I'm at home tonight. But as of June 30th, 2019, the total OPEB liability for just the town of Wenham, as a school district's a separate entity, so they have their own separate number. But for the town, as of June 30th, 2019, was roughly 5.6 million, which we have put basically in the bank about $500,000 toward that over the last few fiscal years. And every year our payment towards that is obviously escalating by 10,000. So while not anywhere near the funding mechanism of a private entity, in terms of municipal best practices of what the DOR, the Department of Revenue, looks for, we are at least doing some annual contribution and annually increasing that annual contribution, which is pretty good for a municipality of our size. By no means perfect, so a lot of work to be done, but
that's good to know. And what was the school district add-on to that 5.6 million liability that we have? And respectfully, I will say, I think it's great we're increasing our participation, but 70,000 to a $5.6 million liability doesn't take you a lot of quick math to say 30 years, how much do I put in at 70,000, right? We're not doing it fast enough with 5.6. And I don't believe we have the entire hold identified. So it would be good for us to know this as citizens if we're already at tax rates that are in the top, I think, dozen towns out of 365 towns. And where it's all going to cycle back. I don't mean to beat on you and the finance committee. You're doing a wonderful job, but the citizenry needs to be understanding of these numbers, and it has to get out.
So just as
it's
a reference point, oh, sorry, go ahead, David.
No, you can go first, Jackie.
Oh, I just wanted to comment that if you did want to look at, I don't have the school's liability in front of me, but all of the town liabilities information is in our annual audit. And all of those audits from fiscal 15 to the present, which is fiscal 20, the last year we closed, are all on our website at wenhamma.gov under important documents, under financial documents. So everything I just referenced is like publicly available on the website. And I'd be happy to, we can certainly share it with you via email at the end of the night too.
That'd be great. Thank you.
So the quick answer of where you were, I just did some research. We were in the top 49 last year for where we were. We between Sharon and Blackstone as far as the tax rate, but that was from 2020. There's been nothing, if it goes from 19 to 20, 20 to 21 might be come out after June. You raise questions that are good, that part of the school committee, the finance committee of both towns have been trying to address for years. So, there are maybe prior meetings if you want to watch, or documents on the town, or the district website as far as unfunded and how we go about the budget. I'm not saying anything out of that's not public. The discussions with the school about their budget has been ongoing. I think there's my third or fourth year on the board of finance, and it's been a constant back and forth about the town budget and what's going on. Some of the main issues with that I see in viewing everything is we have 3 separate elementary schools. Each of those have some capital requirements that are there, and building a new school is very expensive. So those are my quick answers for you, but the questions or answers are what a lot of people have, and it's been addressed. We're trying to address over the last couple of years, but it's not anything that's new. We've been trying to solve it over the last few years.
And David, if I realize that your finance committee, ultimately, if the budget for the school, which is 55% of the budget, is set by somebody else, and then we have to approve it, right? Should we be taking the concerns up to the school committee? Do they open themselves the same way you do as a finance committee?
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. Let me, if I could, Dave, respond. Yeah, we have ongoing discussions with them, Angus. We started the discussions this year in early December, actually, and had multiple meetings with them, as we do typically every year. But this year we had several more meetings, which resulted in a positive arriving at a positive position with a much reduced increase in cost. But the unfunded liability for the schools, I don't have the number, but I believe they budgeted $100,000 in their budget for the upcoming fiscal year. But I don't have the total number, which I'm sure the schools do have.
All right, thanks. I didn't mean to take up so much of the time, but that's why I signed in tonight, was that there's obviously some really big stuff happening.
Yeah, and I have Mr. West, these are excellent questions. Thank you for them. We do spend a lot of time with the school district and the town of Hamilton and the town of Wenham to manage expenses that we have control over. And I guess I also want to add some of the expenses that we contend with, we have less control over, like OPEB, for example. And just a side note on that, we did meet with bond rating agencies and actuaries, and to make sure we're on a plan. And like Jackie mentioned earlier, that's meeting best municipal practices, that we fund it to a level where we may not be making as much of a dent as we had hoped to, given other demands on our budget, but we are funding it where it's not going to negatively impact our bond rating, just FYI. It is something we
Right.
spend time on and manage. And then there's other things we have minimal control over, but even so, we manage a lot, like healthcare costs are a big chunk of Wenham's budget. They're also a big chunk of the school budget. And in the 4 years I've been on FinCom, we go back and forth between different healthcare plans to try to manage those. That's a statewide, if not a national challenge. And, you know, I've done research on healthcare costs. The cost of healthcare, as well as the cost of education, is far exceeding the rate of increase of like the cost of like consumer price index, like what other things are rising in cost. So that's a significant challenge here and elsewhere. And then, you know, there's a lot of educational mandates that the school is required
Right.
legally, which is a chunk of change. So, you know, we've done a little bit of trying to work with the state legislature, coordinated with the school district and then other districts in the region, just FYI, to try to address some of these broader based structural issues that we have to fund. Nonetheless, we don't have much control over some of what the expenses are.
Tom Younger, Town Administrator.
There we go.
There you go.
Thank you. I'm on. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. West, for joining. Excellent questions. One thing that I'm recommending to the select board, I'm here for a short period of time, 6-7 months, probably here for another 2 to 3 months. In my office, I have a pile of materials, which is basically a package of best practices that I'll be recommending to the board for, you know, to look into with my successor going forward and such. But one of them is to address your issue you were talking about, OPEB and such, is one of my recommendations is that annually that the select board and the finance committee have a public meeting with our auditors, to have the auditors make a presentation to the board and the finance committee. And it's a public presentation to update, go through our audit, if there's any recommendations that they want to make. But that also would cover issues such as OPEB that would be out there in the public realm. So that's one of my recommendations I'll be making to the board in the future months.
Great.
Thank you, Tom. Jackie, do we have other questions in the chat room? I see 2 chats there. Is there other folks that have questions or comments?
No, Jim, the only person in the chat was me. I was just letting folks know that the presentation you made tonight is available at wenham.gov/budgets.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Jackie. Any other comments or questions from any other town officials or the finance committee? Tom?
Yeah, this is basically breaking news. Going back to your presentation, and it was coming across my email as we discussed. The House Ways and Means budget has been released, and I can give you an update of where the numbers are released to our local aid projections. They're good. They're not better, but they're good. We had projected conservatively on our local aid numbers. Now, the House and the Senate have come to a resolution that they have a joint agreed number. So the number will not be going up or going down from what the House Ways and Means is proposing. What they're proposing for Wenham is the identical same number that the governor had proposed. So for unrestricted general government assistance, that's slightly under $471,000. And for Chapter 70, that's slightly under 3.8 million. It's 3,799,389. So there is no increase for the Chapter 70 for the district. Nor did they take what we were hoping would occur was regarding our enrollment numbers. They're still going with the enrollment numbers that are COVID related, so to speak. Except they did place in the budget a $40 million basically reserve fund to assist towns that were heavily hit by the enrollment change. But there's no information regarding how you access it, who qualifies for such. So for our budgetary purposes, for our FY22 budget, we budgeted properly. The numbers are fine for the local aid. There may be some smaller little numbers for revenues and expenses that will come out in the next few days, but that really shouldn't affect us. But the two major accounts are the same as what the governor proposed, but we proposed a lower number. So we're in fine shape there.
Thank you, Tom. That is reasonably good news.
Well,
Going into next fiscal year.
It was actually interesting, Jim, because in our earlier discussion, I had said, well, I was calculating if at best the school department might get 15,000
Right.
based
Right.
on that, and that didn't occur. But it's at the same number that was proposed by the governor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from folks in the community?
I have a quick comment. It's been a different kind of experience during the pandemic and COVID-19. It's also been challenging locally with a lot of changes that our local government has been experiencing. And I just want to thank everyone in town government that we've worked with and all the citizens who have helped manage through this process. And I want to punctuate the headline for FY22 budget is no override. So thank you, everyone.
Yay.
Thank you, Karen. And that's a result of a lot of hard work on the town administrative side, the department heads who we've met with continuously. We've had liaisons to each of the departments this year. And of course, Jackie, Jamie, and Tom have been meeting with them routinely. So that's thank you for pointing that out, Carrie. It has been a different kind of year. And we're moving towards a full select board pretty soon. We have 2 members now, with Miss Harrison has joined us tonight as the most recently elected for the next 13 months.
Welcome back.
There'll be an election on the 6th to fill our third opening for a 3-year term. So and then we will be moving into a new town administrator sometime over the early summer. Is that fair to say?
Yep.
So somewhere in that time frame. So we are pulling things back together, and it is a terrific effort on behalf of a lot of people. So thank you. Any other comments or questions?
This is my last contemplation on it. So there has been a lot of change, but I appreciate how people have turned the change into opportunity. It's just the last thing I want to say. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, Jim, it wouldn't make sense if I said nothing, and I apologize for joining late. I rarely say nothing.
You have to meet your coaching obligations, Alex. That is an important.
It's the triple witching hour, I must say, not great.
I appreciate that.
And again, sorry for being late, and thank you, Jim, for all that you've done, chairing the committee, doing a fantastic job, steering us through a really difficult period. And the fact that it's a balanced budget is, due in large part because of not only the committee, but as you said, all the hard work at Town Hall. So appreciate that very much, Tom, Jackie, Jamie.
Thank you.
And others. So I think that kind of, Angus, when I joined late, it was during your questions, which I agree were great. And we would certainly encourage you and others to learn about the regional school district's budgeting process. Of course, the school committee has autonomy over that. But as you point out, it's a large part of our budget, and just hearing how that process unfolds, it's an interesting dynamic, one that typically works quite well with respect to the organizational challenges and, partnership with the schools and towns, member communities. The OPEB piece, you're absolutely right. We're not going to fund our way out of it. There's no expectation that we'd ever be able to, but I do think we're doing the right thing and at least making an effort there. And I think a lot of it on the tax rate side, the one thing I just want to add is it becomes a levy capacity game, whereby if we had 16 million, for example, that we were going to tax, and you add on another 400,000 for 2.5%, and then you add a little bit of growth, new growth in the town, another 150, 200 grand, you got 600 grand to work with. And if you just said 12 million on the school budget, round numbers there, that's a 5% increase that would take up the whole thing. So that's why we've been pinched the past few years. You add in the compounding effect of enrollment shift, which has favored us financially this year. And it just becomes a question of, where could this money go and how do we end up with these overrides? But it's really nice to get a balanced budget this year. I'm thrilled. It's my last year on FinCom after 6 years. So it's great that we're able to come in under our levy limit and not have our residents face another override. And I know it's challenging in Hamilton as a member community with the regional as well. And hope that we can see our way through this and budget for the long term with the decisions that both FinCom in the coming years, as well as the select board, will be making together. So been a privilege for me to be on the committee, and I thank you, Jim, and everyone else.
Thank you, Alex, for your comments. It's appreciated. I just one more time, I think the master plan will play an integral role in the next several years of addressing, not solving necessarily, but addressing a number of these issues so we can come up with some reasonable solutions over the next 3 to 6 years, 5 to 10 years, somewhere in that range, because they are challenges for a small residential community like Wenham. So that's been our challenge for a number of years. So I'm not seeing any other questions or comments. I want to thank the Finance Committee and the town administrators for helping and putting this together tonight. I'm going to call for a motion to adjourn the Finance Committee meeting of April 14th.
So moved. Or second.
Motion's been made and
seconded.
I wasn't paying close enough
seconded by
attention.
Susan.
I made the motion. It's your
Okay.
suggestion. Susan
Motion's
second.
been
Sorry,
made to
Jim.
adjourn and seconded by, motion made by Alex and seconded by Susan Catherine T. All those in favor of adjournment, and go through one by one.
Hi, Carrie.
Hi, Alex.
Hey, David.
Hi, Susan.
Hi, Jim. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you for the warrant hearing on April 26th. I believe it's at 7 o'clock, if that's right. Thanks. Thank you, Captain. Thank you, Town, Jackie, and Jamie, and Gary for joining us. And thank you, Mr. West, for your questions. We'll begin to
Thank you for opening it to us all on Zoom.
dive into that. Good evening, everybody.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night,
Good
everyone.
night,
Thank you.
thank you.
Bye-bye.